The first day of school always carried a mix of hope and fear, but for Amara Cole it felt heavier than that. Standing at the gate of Oak Ridge Academy, she held her backpack straps tightly and tried to steady her breath. Everything about the place seemed intimidating. The tall glass windows, the rows of expensive cars, and the sound of laughter that did not include her. She had moved here only a week ago with her father, Marcus, who wanted her to have a better education. He had told her that this school could open doors for her future, but as she stepped inside, all she could think about was how different she looked from everyone else. Her simple uniform, worn shoes, and quiet nature made her stand out among students who had grown up in wealth and confidence. Her curls bounced with every nervous step she took as she whispered to herself, "Just one day at a time, Amara. One day at a time." The morning bell rang, echoing through the wide corridors. Amara's eyes darted across the hallway filled with polished lockers and bright posters. Students gathered in small groups, laughing loudly, comparing phones and talking about weekend plans she could not relate to. When she finally reached her assigned locker, she felt a pair of eyes on her. A tall girl with perfect blonde hair and an expensive-looking handbag stood nearby, surrounded by her friends. "Who's the new girl?" the girl asked, her tone casual but sharp. Amara looked up and offered a polite smile. "Hi, I'm Amara. It's my first day," she said softly. The girl exchanged glances with her friends. "I'm Sophie," she replied, looking Amara up and down. "Nice." "Shoes." The laughter that followed made Amara's cheeks burn. She turned away, pretending to organize her books, her heart thumping fast. It was not the first time she had heard that kind of laughter. It was the sound that always reminded her that being different came with a price. At lunch, she sat alone near the window, her small lunchbox neatly placed in front of her. Her father had packed her favorite sandwich, peanut butter and jam, cut into neat triangles the way he always did. She smiled for a moment, remembering how he had kissed her forehead that morning and said, "Be kind no matter what." That kindness, she believed, was her strength. But it was also the reason people often took advantage of her. She tried to eat quietly, focusing on the view outside, but soon the laughter from Sophie's table reached her ears again. Sophie and her friends had the largest table in the cafeteria, and they seemed to enjoy being the center of attention. Every time Amara looked up, she caught one of them staring and whispering something, followed by muffled laughter. Finally, Sophie stood up and walked over to her. "Hey, new girl," she said, resting one manicured hand on Amara's table. "You're sitting all alone. Don't you have anyone to eat with?" Amara shook her head. "Not yet," she replied politely. Sophie smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's a shame. Maybe you'll make friends if you fit in." Amara stayed silent, unsure of what to say. Sophie leaned closer. "So what does your dad do? Work for someone here?" The question caught Amara off guard. "He's just working," she answered. "He does something important." Sophie raised her eyebrows. "Important? Like what? Drives a bus? Cleans houses?" Her friends burst into laughter again. Amara forced herself to smile, holding her tears back. "He's a good man," she said softly. Sophie shrugged and said, "Sure he is," before walking away. That evening, Amara tried to hide her sadness as she walked into their small apartment. The smell of food greeted her immediately. Her father, Marcus, was cooking dinner. He looked up with his usual warm smile. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with quiet confidence. His gray hair and sharp eyes made him look older, but there was a calm strength in his presence. "There's my girl," he said, turning down the heat. "How was school?" Amara hesitated, forcing a small smile. "It was fine," she said. Marcus studied her face, noticing the faint sadness behind her eyes. "Just fine?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. "Yeah," she replied quickly. "Just different. Everyone's so rich." He laughed gently. "Money isn't everything, sweetheart. Some people are rich in things but poor in heart. Don't forget that." She nodded, appreciating how his words always made things seem lighter. But even while eating dinner, her mind drifted back to the cafeteria, to Sophie's laughter, and to how small she had felt sitting alone. Later that night, Marcus came into her room to say goodnight. "You're strong, Amara," he said softly, "and you don't have to prove it by fighting with anyone. Just stay true to who you are." She smiled sleepily and whispered, "I will, Dad." But when he left her room, his smile faded. He had noticed a small red mark on her collarbone when she changed for bed, and though she brushed it off as nothing, It made his chest tighten. Marcus Cole had spent years burying the man he once was, the man the streets called Ghost. He had done things he was not proud of, built an empire of fear and respect, and then walked away from it all when Amara was born. She was his reason for peace, the only thing that kept his darkness at rest. But that night, sitting alone on the couch, he could not shake the feeling that his daughter was hiding pain. The next morning, Amara tried to start fresh. She tied her hair neatly and put on her uniform with determination. "You got this," she told herself in the mirror. Marcus dropped her at school, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Remember," he said, "the world only wins when you let it change who you are." She smiled and waved goodbye as he drove off. But the day did not go as planned. During break, as she walked down the hallway, she heard giggles behind her. Turning slightly, she saw Sophie and Ryan, one of her friends, walking toward her. "Hey, new girl," Ryan called out. "We were just talking about your dad." Amara stopped walking. "Why?" she asked quietly. Sophie smiled like a cat that had caught a mouse. "Just curious. You never told us what he does." "He works in security," Amara said calmly. "He helps people," Ryan chuckled. "Oh, really? So he's like a bodyguard or something?" "Something like that," Amara said. Sophie leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Or maybe he's one of those men who pretends to be tough but really just cleans up after others." The group laughed again. Amara's heart raced. "Stop it," she said quietly. "Please," but Sophie was not done. "Why, you don't like jokes?" Then, without warning, Ryan grabbed her tie and pulled her slightly forward. "Tell us, new girl. Is your dad dangerous?" His tone was mocking, but there was something cruel in his eyes. Amara's breath caught. "Let me go," she said, her voice trembling. Sophie took out her phone, recording the moment, her smirk widening. "Come on, Ryan, smile. Let's show everyone how tough the new girl is." The laughter echoed in the empty hallway. Amara stood frozen, her hands shaking, her face burning with humiliation. She whispered, "Please stop." Ryan finally released her with a push. She stumbled back, catching herself on the wall. "You'll regret this," she said softly, tears brimming in her eyes. Sophie chuckled. "Regret? What are you going to do, cry to your dad?" She laughed, turning off her phone and walking away. The sound of their laughter stayed with Amara long after they were gone. That evening, when she came home, she tried to hide it again. Marcus was waiting at the table, reading the newspaper. He looked up and saw the sadness in her eyes before she even spoke. "Amara," he said gently, "what happened today?" She shook her head. "Nothing, Dad, I'm fine." But he could see her fingers trembling as she poured herself a glass of water. "You're not fine," he said quietly. "You forget who you're talking to." His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Did someone hurt you?" She looked down. "It's just, some girls were being mean. It's not a big deal." Marcus leaned back slowly, studying her face. "You're sure?" She nodded. "Yes." After a long silence, he finally said, "All right, if you say so." He stood up, walked to the window, and stared outside at the dark street. Amara went to her room, believing the conversation was over. But Marcus Cole's thoughts were racing. He walked to the small cabinet near his desk and pulled out a wooden box. Inside was a single silver ring engraved with a symbol few men in the city dared to wear. He held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of his past pressing against his chest. "I gave this life up for her," he whispered. "But if they touch my world again..." He did not finish the sentence. The next morning, Marcus drove Amara to school again. As she got out of the car, she smiled at him and said, "I love you, Dad." He smiled back, his hand resting on the steering wheel. "I love you too, sweetheart." But after she disappeared through the gates, his smile faded. He watched the building with cold, steady eyes and whispered, "No one hurts my little girl." The next few days at Oak Ridge Academy passed slowly for Amara, each one blending into the next like gray clouds before a storm. She tried to keep her head down, focused on her classes, and avoided the stares that followed her through the hallways. But whispers had a way of finding her wherever she went. Some were quiet enough that only she could hear them, little darts of cruelty wrapped in laughter. "She thinks she's better than us. Her dad's probably some thug. Look at her bag. My dog's toy costs more." She told herself to ignore them. She told herself her father's advice was stronger than their words. Yet every time she heard the laughter, something small inside her cracked a little more. At home, she smiled and pretended everything was fine. Marcus never pressed her with questions. He watched her closely, noticing how she seemed quieter lately, how she would look away quickly when he caught her staring into space. He had learned long ago that silence could hide the deepest pain. And that kind of silence, and the kind that sits in a child's eyes, always spoke louder than words. By the fourth day, Sophie and her friends grew bolder. Cruelty, once subtle, began to turn into a performance. In the classroom, they whispered loud enough for Amara to hear. In the hall, they brushed past her shoulder as if she were invisible. One afternoon, Sophie cornered her near the lockers. "Hey, new girl," she said with a grin. "You dropped this." She held up a crushed piece of paper, Amara's homework, now covered in dirt. Ryan and another boy laughed behind her. Amara felt her face heat up. "That's mine," she said quietly, trying to reach for it. "Oh, you want it?" Sophie asked, pretending to hand it over, then tossed it onto the floor. "Oops," the laughter echoed in the hallway. Amara stood there, frozen for a moment, before slowly kneeling down to pick it up. She told herself to breathe, to stay calm, to remember her father's words. But as she looked up, she saw Ryan holding up his phone, recording the entire thing. Later that day, the video appeared on social media, a short clip of Amara picking up her paper while the others laughed. The caption read, "Queen of the Trash." By the time she got home, the post had already spread across school group chats. That evening, Amara sat at the dining table, staring at her untouched dinner. Marcus noticed immediately. "You didn't eat," he said softly. She shook her head. "Not hungry." He set down his fork and studied her carefully. "Want to talk about it?" he asked. "I told you, Dad, it's fine," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not fine if you can't look at me when you say it," he said gently. She finally looked up, her eyes shimmering with tears she didn't want him to see. "They hate me, Dad," she whispered. "No matter what I do, they find something to laugh about. They made a video today." Marcus's expression darkened, but his voice stayed calm. "A video?" She nodded. "They posted it online. Everyone saw it." He leaned back, silent for a long moment. "And what did you do?" "Nothing," she said, wiping her eyes. "You told me not to fight." Marcus nodded slowly. "I did, but not fighting doesn't mean staying silent. Sometimes you have to let people know where your line is." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked at her tenderly, his voice steady. "Respect is not given, Amara. It's earned, and sometimes it's demanded. Tomorrow, walk tall. Don't let them see your fear." But as calm as his tone was, something deep inside Marcus Cole had begun to shift. That night, when Amara went to bed, he sat alone on the couch, his old instincts crawling back from a place he thought he had buried forever. He opened his laptop and searched for Oak Ridge Academy's website. Then he looked up its list of board members. One of the names caught his eye, Charles Whitmore, Sophie's father. He recognized the name immediately, a businessman who had once worked with certain people Marcus knew in his former life. People who never crossed him twice. Marcus leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Small world," he murmured. The next morning, Amara walked into school early. The air felt heavy, the hallways unusually quiet. She hoped the video would be forgotten soon, that maybe the day would pass without another confrontation. But when she entered her classroom, the whispers began again. "That's her," someone said, snickering. "The trash girl." She sat down quietly, keeping her eyes on her notebook. When the teacher stepped out for a brief moment, Sophie's voice broke the silence. "Hey, Amara," she said sweetly. "Nice video, huh? You're kind of famous now." The whole class laughed. Amara looked up, her hands trembling slightly. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "Why not?" Sophie asked. "You embarrassed yourself. We just helped you go viral." The laughter grew louder. Suddenly, Amara stood up. Her heart raced, but her voice came out clear. "You think you're strong because you can humiliate someone who's alone," she said. "That doesn't make you powerful, Sophie. It makes you cruel." The laughter died down for a moment. Sophie blinked, surprised that Amara had spoken up. Then she smirked. "Look who's got a little attitude now. What's your dad going to do, huh? Come fight your battles." "No," Amara replied quietly. "He doesn't need to." The calmness in her tone unsettled Sophie more than any threat could have. But before she could respond, the teacher returned, and the room went silent again. After class, as Amara walked toward her locker, Ryan and Sophie followed her. You think you're tough now? Ryan sneered. You shouldn't have talked back. Before she could react, he shoved her shoulder lightly. You're lucky we don't really show you your place. Amara stepped back, her heart pounding. Just leave me alone, she said. Sophie's lips curled into a smile. We're not done with you yet. They waited until lunch when the cafeteria was full. Sophie stood near the center table and waved at Amara. Hey, new girl. Come here. Amara froze. The room fell quiet for a moment as everyone turned to look. Sophie held up her phone again. Since you're famous already, we thought we'd make it official. How about a performance? Ryan laughed. Yeah, maybe she can sing us a song for her lunch. Or clean the floor again, another voice added. Amara felt a lump in her throat. Her fingers clenched around the strap of her bag. Her whole body wanted to run, but she forced herself to stay still. She remembered her father's words from the night before. Sometimes you have to let people know where your line is. Her voice shook as she spoke. You don't have to do this, Sophie tilted her head. But it's fun. She picked up a tray of food from the table beside her, mashed potatoes and gravy, and before anyone could stop her, she tilted it just enough for some of it to spill near Amara's shoes. Oops, she said, smiling. Laughter erupted again. Amara looked down at the mess on the floor. Her vision blurred with tears. You're pathetic, she said quietly. Sophie's smile faded. What did you say? Amara looked up, her eyes filled with hurt but steady. You heard me. For a long moment, the cafeteria went silent. No one had ever talked to Sophie like that. Ryan stepped forward, his jaw tightening. But before he could say anything, a teacher entered the room asking what was going on. Nothing, Sophie said quickly, her fake smile returning. Just helping our new friend clean up. Amara walked away without a word, leaving her tray behind. She reached the bathroom, locked the door, and finally let the tears fall. The laughter from the cafeteria still echoed in her mind. She looked at herself in the mirror, her tie askew, her eyes red, and whispered, I'm tired. That evening, Marcus came home early. Amara sat silently on the couch, scrolling through her phone, staring at the video that had been reposted again, this time with even more comments. Marcus sat beside her and gently took the phone from her hand. He watched the short clip, then set it down carefully on the table. Who are they? He asked in a calm, low voice. Just some girls, she said. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, he said. She looked up and saw that his expression was still calm. Too calm. Please, Dad, she said softly. Don't go there, Marcus smiled faintly. I won't do anything crazy, sweetheart. I just want to talk. That night, long after Amara had gone to bed, Marcus made a phone call. His voice was quiet, measured, polite, but it carried a tone that made the man on the other end go still. Charles Whitmore, Marcus said. This is Marcus Cole. We need to talk about our children tomorrow. He hung up before the man could respond. He walked to Amara's room, watched her sleeping peacefully, and whispered, You will never cry because of them again. Then he turned off the light and stood for a long time in the dark, the calm expression on his face hiding something far older, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. And that storm, once it arrived, would make everyone at Oak Ridge Academy remember the day they mocked the wrong girl. The next morning, the sky over Oak Ridge was heavy with low gray clouds. Amara woke up early, even before her alarm. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the uniform folded neatly on the chair. Her stomach twisted at the thought of going back. Every corner of that school now carried the sound of laughter that wasn't kind, and she could still feel the cold eyes watching her. For a moment, she wished she could stay home forever, where the air was gentle and her father's voice felt like safety, but she remembered what he told her the night before. Walk tall even if your knees shake. When she entered the kitchen, Marcus was already awake. He stood by the counter pouring coffee into a mug, wearing his usual gray shirt and calm expression. But behind those eyes, something unreadable had settled. You're up early, he said with a soft smile. Amara nodded. Couldn't sleep? Marcus leaned against the counter, studying her face. Want me to drop you off? She hesitated, then nodded again. Yeah. Please. The drive to school was quiet. The radio played softly, but neither of them really listened. As they pulled up to the gates, Marcus parked the car and looked at her. Remember what I told you, he said gently. Don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. I'll try, she whispered. He smiled faintly. You don't try, sweetheart. You just do. She got out, waved, and started walking toward the entrance. Marcus watched her go, his jaw tight. When she disappeared inside the building, he sat there for a while, his hand still resting on the gear shift, the coffee growing cold beside him. Then, after a long breath, he started the car. But instead of driving home, he turned the wheel the other way and parked across the street. Inside the school, Amara moved through the hallways like a ghost. People still whispered, still giggled when she passed, but she kept her head high. Her heart pounded each time she saw Sophie or Ryan. But she reminded herself she had already survived the worst part, humiliation. Nothing could hurt more than that moment in the cafeteria. When Sophie passed her near the lockers, their eyes met. For a split second, Sophie faltered. There was something different about Amara that morning. The quiet girl who used to shrink back now walked with her shoulders straight and her chin lifted. Sophie looked away first, pretending not to care. But that tiny moment stayed with her all day. By mid-morning, Marcus was sitting in the principal's office. He hadn't made an appointment. He simply walked in, calm and polite, carrying an air that made people move out of his way without knowing why. The receptionist looked nervous when she met his eyes. "Sir, do you have—" "I'm here to see the principal," he said quietly. I can check if she's available." "She will be," he said. Within minutes, the principal, Mrs. Langford, came out, straightening her glasses. "Mr. Cole, is it?" "Yes," Marcus said, standing up. "I'm Amara Cole's father." Her polite smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Please come in." He followed her into her office, the door closing softly behind them. "I hope everything is okay," Mrs. Langford began, folding her hands on the desk. Marcus sat down slowly, his posture relaxed but deliberate. "It's not," he said calmly. "My daughter has been bullied, humiliated, and filmed on school property. I'd like to know what your institution plans to do about it." Mrs. Langford's face stiffened. "I'm aware of a minor incident, Mr. Cole. Children can sometimes—" "Children," he interrupted, his tone still low but suddenly colder. "You call what happened to her childish? They posted a video online mocking her. That's not childish, and that's cruelty with an audience." The principal shifted uncomfortably. "We've spoken to the students involved. They'll receive disciplinary action." "What kind of action?" Marcus asked. "A warning," she said. "A warning," he repeated slowly, leaning back in his chair. His silence filled the room. Mrs. Langford swallowed hard. "Mr. Cole, I understand this must be difficult." "No," he said softly. "You don't." For a long moment, there was only the ticking of the wall clock. Then Marcus stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I'll handle it myself," Mrs. Langford frowned. "Mr. Cole, please, we don't want any trouble." "Neither do I," he said. "But trouble has a way of finding me when people hurt my family." He gave a polite nod and walked out, leaving her sitting frozen in silence. That afternoon, Amara walked out of school, surprised to see her father waiting outside the gate. "Dad?" she said, startled. "Hey, princess," he said, smiling. "Thought I'd pick you up today." Her heart warmed. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." As they drove, he asked casually, "How was your day?" "Better," she said truthfully. "They didn't bother me much." He nodded, eyes still on the road. "Good. That's how it should be." They stopped for ice cream on the way home, something they hadn't done in months. Marcus watched her talk between bites, trying to hide the bruises she still carried inside. He listened carefully to every word, memorizing the small smile on her face, the one he'd protect at any cost. That night, when Amara went to sleep, Marcus made another call. This time it was short and quiet. "Charles," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Tomorrow, my place, 7 p.m. Then he hung up. At 7 sharp, the knock came. Marcus opened the door to find Charles Whitmore, a tall, expensively dressed man in his late 50s, standing stiffly on the porch. His expression carried the usual arrogance of someone used to being obeyed, but it faded when he met Marcus's eyes. "Marcus Cole," Charles said, forcing a smile. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Marcus replied, stepping aside. "Come in." Charles entered cautiously, looking around the modest apartment. "I must say I didn't expect this," he said lightly. "Last I heard you were living big somewhere down south." Marcus gestured toward the chair. "Sit." When Charles sat, Marcus remained standing, his calm presence suddenly carrying the weight of something old, something dangerous. "I'm going to make this simple," Marcus said. "Your daughter and her friends humiliated mine. They posted a video. They made her life miserable. You will make sure that ends permanently." Charles frowned. "Marcus, they're just kids." "Sophie didn't mean—" "Don't," Marcus interrupted, his voice flat. "Don't insult me by pretending she didn't mean it. You taught her power without compassion. Now you'll teach her what respect looks like." Charles stiffened. "And if I don't?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice almost a whisper. "Then you'll see what the old Marcus Cole looks like." For a brief second, the mask of the businessman cracked. Charles swallowed hard. He remembered the stories, the name whispered in old circles. The ghost, the man no one crossed. "You haven't changed," Charles muttered, forcing a shaky laugh. "I have," Marcus said. "That's why you're still sitting here." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Marcus added quietly, "Make it right, Charles. And not just because I said so and because it's what a father should do." Charles looked down, guilt flickering in his eyes for the first time. "She'll apologize," he said finally. "Tomorrow." "At school?" Marcus nodded once. "Good." As Charles left, Marcus closed the door softly and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. For a man who had once commanded fear, this was the only fight that mattered. One fought not with fists or threats, but for his daughter's dignity. The next day, Sophie walked into school with her father beside her. The hallway buzzed with quiet curiosity. Amara was at her locker when she heard the murmurs. She turned around and froze. Sophie stood a few feet away, eyes lowered. "Amara," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything." The words hung in the air. Amara didn't know how to react. The apology felt strange, unexpected, but also real. Sophie's father stood behind her, his face pale and serious. "It won't happen again," he said quietly. Amara looked at Sophie for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she said simply. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. She just turned back to her locker. Sophie stood there, embarrassed but silent. Then she walked away with her father, the whispers following them instead. Later that afternoon, as Amara left the school gates, she saw her father's car parked across the street again. He gave her a small wave. She smiled and ran toward him. "Dad," she said breathlessly. "Something weird happened today." Sophie apologized. He pretended to look surprised. "Really?" "Yeah, it was strange. I don't know why she did it." Marcus smiled faintly. "Maybe people finally remembered how to be human." Amara laughed, shaking her head. "You always say things like that." He opened the car door for her. "It's true, though. The world changes when people decide to stop being cruel." As they drove home, the clouds outside began to part, sunlight spilling across the road. Amara looked out the window, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She didn't know the full story behind that apology. She didn't know her father's quiet shadow stretched farther than she could imagine. All she knew was that for the first time, she felt safe again. And as Marcus glanced at her reflection in the mirror, he thought of one thing: a peace was worth any war, as long as it meant his daughter could smile again. The day after Sophie's apology, a quiet calm spread through the halls of Oak Ridge Academy. But underneath that calm, something new was stirring. Rumors began to circulate, not about Amara this time, but about her father. The story of what had happened in the principal's office and the unexpected appearance of Sophie's father had somehow spread through the teacher's lounge and into the student whispers. "Did you hear?" someone said. Her dad talked to the principal. Even Sophie's dad looked scared. Another voice replied, "Yeah, I heard he used to work for the government or something." No one really knew the truth, but the mystery around Marcus Cole was growing, like a shadow stretching longer every hour. Amara, however, knew nothing of this. For the first time since she had arrived, she felt free. The laughter that used to follow her through the hallways had stopped. No one shoved her books anymore. No one dared to record her. When she passed Sophie in the hallway, the girl quickly looked away. For the first time in weeks, Amara was able to smile without forcing it. But in that peace, she began to notice something else. People were looking at her differently now. Not with pity, not with cruelty, but with quiet curiosity. It made her uneasy. She wondered what had changed, what had caused everyone to suddenly treat her with respect she had not earned yet. That afternoon, She stayed behind after class to help her English teacher, Mr. Ellis, organize some papers. He had always been kind to her, offering gentle words when things got tough. "You're looking happier these days, Amara," he said as he stacked a pile of books. "How are things going?" "Better," she said honestly. "People are nicer." "That's good," he said with a nod. But there was a slight hesitation in his voice, as if he knew more than he wanted to say. Amara noticed and asked softly, "Is something wrong?" He looked up, then quickly shook his head. "No, not wrong, just your father came to speak with the school administration." Amara blinked in surprise. "He did?" "Yes," Mr. Ellis said gently. "He's a very impressive man." The principal said he handled things calmly, but he stopped himself. "But what?" Mr. Ellis sighed and smiled faintly. "Let's just say no one will be bothering you again." As Amara walked home that day, her mind kept replaying his words. Her father had gone to the school. He had done something. She didn't know what, but she knew him well enough to understand that when Marcus Cole made a decision, he always followed through quietly, without chaos, without raising his voice. That night, when she sat at the dinner table, she asked him directly. "Dad," she said softly, "did you go to my school?" Marcus looked up from his plate. "I did. Why didn't you tell me?" He wiped his hands on a napkin and leaned back in his chair. "Because you already had enough to carry. I didn't want to add more." Amara frowned slightly. "What did you say to them?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Nothing they didn't already know deep down. That no child deserves to be humiliated. That's all." She studied his face. His voice was calm, but his eyes were different. They carried something ancient, something she couldn't name. "You're sure that's all?" He chuckled softly. "You sound like your mother when you ask questions like that." Her face softened. "You never talk about her." Marcus grew quiet. He took a sip of water, his gaze drifting toward the window where the city lights blinked faintly in the distance. "There are parts of the past that are better left asleep," he said finally. "But sometimes the past doesn't stay asleep," she said quietly. Marcus smiled at her insight, proud but cautious. "You're right. But if it ever wakes up, you make sure you stay far away from it. Promise me that, Amara." "I promise," she said, though she didn't fully understand what he meant. Later that night, after Amara had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone in the living room. The TV played softly, but he wasn't watching. His phone buzzed on the table. There was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Marcus Cole," a voice said on the other end, smooth and measured. "It's been a long time." Marcus's face remained calm. "Who is this?" "You don't remember me?" "We used to run the East Docks together, before you decided to disappear." Marcus exhaled slowly. "That was another lifetime." "Maybe," the voice said. "But you showing up at Whitmore's doorstep stirred things up. People are asking questions again. You really think you can walk into that world and not wake it up?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I'm not part of that world anymore." "That world doesn't forget its own," the voice said. "Be careful, Ghost." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it down carefully. The name Ghost hadn't been spoken to him in years. A name built in alleys and whispers. The name that once made men disappear. He had buried it when Amara was born, but now it was clawing its way back. He rubbed his hands together slowly and murmured, "Not again." The next morning, Amara noticed her father was quieter than usual. He moved slower, more thoughtful. "You okay, Dad?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Always, sweetheart. Just tired." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You work too much," he smiled. "That's what dads do." When she left for school, he stood at the window watching her until she disappeared around the corner. The world had no idea who she was, and that was how he wanted it. He had fought too long to build a life clean enough for her to grow safely in. But deep inside, Marcus knew the kind of peace built on buried secrets never lasted forever. At Oak Ridge that day, the air was tense. Teachers spoke in quiet tones, and students kept glancing toward Amara, as if she were carrying an invisible secret. The principal, Mrs. Langford, called an emergency staff meeting. "We've had inquiries," she said to the gathered teachers. "Apparently someone recognized Mr. Cole when he visited. I don't know details, but I've been advised to handle this discreetly." One of the teachers, a nervous man named Mr. Carr, whispered, "Recognized him? From where?" Mrs. Langford hesitated. Let's just say from a world very far from education. The room fell silent. No one dared to ask more. By lunch, rumors had turned into legends. Some said Marcus was an ex-soldier. Others said he had been part of the government's secret division. One wild story claimed he was a former mafia enforcer who disappeared years ago. No one knew which one was true, but every version ended the same way, with the warning not to cross him. When Sophie heard the whispers, her stomach turned cold. That evening, she went home and asked her father, "Dad, who is Amara's dad, really?" Charles looked up from his newspaper, his expression tightening. "Why are you asking?" "People at school are saying things," she said nervously. "They said he used to be someone dangerous." Charles folded the paper slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Sophie, there are men in this world you don't provoke. He's one of them. Be grateful you apologized when you did." Sophie's throat went dry. "Dad, what did you see in his eyes?" Charles sighed heavily. The kind of silence that comes from a man who's done terrible things, but learned how to control them. Don't ever test that kind of man. Back at the Coles apartment, Amara noticed her father cleaning an old watch she had never seen before. It was made of dark metal, with scratches around the rim and a faded symbol carved on the back. "That's not your usual watch," she said. Marcus looked up. "No, this one belonged to an old friend." "Who?" He smiled faintly. "Someone who taught me that strength doesn't always come from power. Sometimes it comes from restraint." She tilted her head. "You talk like you've lived 1,000 lives." Marcus chuckled. "Some days it feels like I have." They sat quietly after that, the evening sunlight spilling across the room. For a moment it felt peaceful again. Father and daughter sharing dinner, talking about school, laughing about small things. But in Marcus's mind, the peace was fragile, a glass wall that could shatter with one phone call. He knew someone would come looking. That was how the past worked. It waited patiently for the right moment to return. And somewhere across the city, in a dimly lit room, two men sat around a table covered with old photos, one of them of Marcus Cole standing beside men who no longer existed. "So the ghost is back," one of them said quietly. "And he's got a daughter now," the other man smiled coldly. "Then he has something to lose." That night, as the rain began to fall outside the apartment, Amara fell asleep to the soft rhythm of raindrops against the window. Marcus sat beside her bed for a while, watching her breathe. She looked peaceful, untouched by the darkness he had once known. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "I will never let them near you." Then he walked to the window, staring out at the wet streets. His reflection looked older than he remembered, harder. The man he used to be was still in there, waiting, and though he had promised himself never to wake that man again, he knew deep down that promises could only hold as long as the past stayed buried. But his past was no longer sleeping. It was wide awake, and this time it was coming straight for him. The following week began with an unusual stillness at Oak Ridge Academy. The rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Teachers moved through the halls more cautiously, and even the students who once ruled the school seemed quieter, their laughter suddenly careful, their voices lower. Somewhere in the middle of all that quiet walked Amara Cole, the girl who once sat alone at lunch, now surrounded by the heavy silence of curiosity and respect. She didn't ask for it, didn't crave it, but she felt it every time someone stepped aside to let her pass. She thought maybe people had finally grown kind. But the truth was far more complicated. The fear of her father had settled into the walls of Oak Ridge like smoke no one could clear away. Marcus Cole had become a quiet myth. None of the students had seen him since that day he spoke to the principal, but his presence lingered. Even the teachers whispered about him. They didn't know who he really was, but they sensed something in him that didn't belong to ordinary life. The calm of someone who had seen storms no one else had survived. For Marcus, life seemed to return to normal on the surface. He continued his work, cooked dinner for Amara, and asked about her homework. But his eyes carried the weight of something deeper now, a constant awareness, as if he was waiting for something he could not yet name. He knew that when men from his past began making calls, peace never lasted long. He had made enemies once, powerful ones, and though he had left that world behind, it had a way of finding him. He hoped it wouldn't touch his daughter's life again. He hoped in vain. It was Thursday afternoon when the first sign appeared. Marcus was standing outside the apartment building, fixing a loose bolt on his motorcycle when a black car slowed across the street. The tinted window rolled down halfway and a man in a suit glanced at him for a split second before driving off. Marcus didn't move. His hand stayed steady, but his mind began to race. He had seen that face before, not clearly, but enough to remember where it belonged. He exhaled slowly, put the wrench back in his bag, and looked up at the darkening sky. "So it begins," he whispered. That same evening, as Amara finished her homework, Marcus received a call. A deep voice on the other end said, "You're hard to find, Ghost." Marcus's jaw clenched. "I told you. That name's dead." The voice chuckled. "You can bury a name, but not the man who built it. You made enemies, Marcus, and enemies have long memories." He hung up before Marcus could reply. For hours, Marcus sat in silence, staring at the window where the city lights flickered faintly. He thought of the life he had built. Simple, small, full of peace, and then the one he had left behind. Violent, ruthless, full of men who had no peace at all. He knew what this call meant. Someone had found him. Someone who wanted to remind the world that the ghost still existed. The next morning, as Amara prepared for school, Marcus seemed calm. "I'll pick you up today," he said, handing her the lunch he'd packed. "Promise?" She smiled. "Promise." But behind that smile, his eyes carried a storm she couldn't see. At school, the atmosphere shifted again. Sophie and her friends walked cautiously, glancing at Amara but never daring to speak. Even the teachers treated her differently. Softer voices, kinder eyes. During lunch, Sophie's father, Charles Whitmore, appeared at the principal's office again. The staff exchanged nervous looks as he entered, accompanied by two men in dark coats. Mrs. Langford tried to keep her tone professional. "Mr. Whitmore, how can I help you?" He didn't answer at first. He looked around the office, then leaned forward slightly. "You know who came to see me last week, don't you?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Langford nodded. "Mr. Cole, do you have any idea who that man really is?" he said, his voice tightening. "You might want to find out before something happens that you can't control." Then he left, leaving a chill behind him. That afternoon, Marcus arrived at the school gate earlier than usual. He stood beside his car, calm, composed, waiting. When Amara finally appeared, her face lit up. "You really came early," she said, surprised. "Always keep a promise," he replied with a small smile. They started walking toward the car when a black sedan pulled up beside them. Marcus's hand gently touched Amara's shoulder. A small gesture, but one that spoke of instinct. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out dressed in black, his expression half polite, half calculating. "Marcus Cole," he said. "Been a long time." Amara looked at her father in confusion. "Dad, do you know him?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on the man. "Get in the car, sweetheart," he said softly. "But now." She obeyed, slipping inside the car as the stranger approached. "You've been hiding well," the man said. "But you can't hide forever." Marcus's tone remained even. "You're standing in front of my child's school. That's a bad decision," the man smirked. "I'm just here to remind you that old debts never vanish." "The boss wants a word." Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "Tell your boss if he comes near my daughter, I'll bury every memory of him this city ever had." The man hesitated. There was something in Marcus's eyes that made him step back. Not anger, but certainty. He muttered something under his breath and returned to the car. As the sedan drove off, Marcus turned and found Amara watching him through the window, confusion and fear mixing in her young face. That night after dinner, she finally asked the question she'd been holding in. "Dad, who is that man?" Marcus paused, then sat down beside her. "Someone from a life I don't live anymore." She looked at him with wide, worried eyes. "Were you a bad person?" He smiled softly, shaking his head. "I was someone who did bad things for the wrong reasons and then walked away before it destroyed everything." Amara stayed quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and held his hand. "You're not bad now," she said. "You're my dad. You protect people." He smiled faintly. "You're the only reason I became better." The next day, Marcus went back to the school. This time not to the principal, not to confront the bullies, but to meet the fear directly. He walked through the gate in a simple black coat, his expression calm, his movements quiet but deliberate. The security guard at the entrance, who had seen hundreds of parents come and go, felt a strange stillness in the air when Marcus passed. He couldn't explain it, but he straightened automatically as if standing in front of someone who commanded respect without saying a word. Inside, Marcus requested a meeting with the school board. Charles Whitmore was already there, waiting with 2 members of the administration. The moment Marcus entered, Charles stood up. "You had no right to threaten me, Cole," he snapped. Marcus didn't flinch. "I didn't threaten you, Charles. I warned you." "You scared my daughter half to death," Charles said angrily. Marcus's voice remained calm. "Your daughter humiliated mine, and I taught her something your money never could in the meaning of consequences." The room fell silent. One of the board members, a younger man, tried to intervene. "Mr. Cole, we understand your frustration, but this isn't how civilized people solve things." Marcus turned his gaze toward him. Not cold, not harsh, just controlled. "Civilized people don't let children destroy each other for sport." Charles's face reddened. "You think you're some kind of hero now?" Marcus smiled faintly. "No, heroes don't exist in my world. Only fathers who protect their children." No one spoke after that. Marcus stood up slowly. "I don't want trouble. I just want peace. Make sure no other child here goes through what mine did." Then he left, leaving behind a silence so deep it lingered long after the door closed. By evening, the entire school had changed. The principal implemented strict anti-bullying policies. Teachers watched more closely. Students who had mocked Amara before now greeted her with respect. And Amara, unaware of the full power her father had just displayed, believed that maybe the world had finally learned compassion. But word of Marcus's confrontation reached beyond the school walls. The man from the black sedan reported back to his employer, a figure from Marcus's past named Rico Vance, a man who once led an empire built on violence and fear. Rico smiled when he heard the story. "So the ghost has a daughter now," he said softly. "Interesting. Maybe it's time we remind him what happens to men who walk away." That night, as Marcus watched Amara fall asleep, he felt it, the calm before the chaos. He walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street, the city lights flickering like small warnings in the dark. His reflection stared back at him, the man he was and the man he had become overlapping for a moment. "If they come," he whispered, "they'll learn this time I'm not fighting for myself." Behind him, Amara stirred in her sleep and murmured something. He turned, walked over, and gently brushed her hair aside. "Sleep, my brave girl," he whispered. "Tomorrow will be better." But deep down, he knew the truth. Tomorrow wouldn't be peaceful. Because the past never forgets. It only waits for the right moment to return. And when it did, Marcus Cole was ready. Morning sunlight spilled softly across the quiet street outside the Cole apartment. The city was just waking up, but inside Marcus was already dressed, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee in his hand. His eyes weren't on the view. They were far away, fixed on the invisible horizon of memory. The world outside looked calm, but in his mind storms moved slowly. He knew what was coming. Men like Rico Vance never sent warnings without meaning. It wasn't a question of if they'd come, it was when. From the bedroom, Amara's voice broke his thoughts. "Dad, are you okay?" He turned, smiling softly. "Always." She walked over, dressed for school, her curls tied back neatly. "You didn't sleep much," she said, sitting beside him. He chuckled. "You've been watching me again. Only because you think I don't notice." He looked at her for a moment, pride and worry mixing behind his calm eyes. "You're growing too fast," she smiled. "Is that a bad thing?" "No," he said quietly. "It's just that the world gets louder the older you get. And I want you to always hear your own voice first." Amara nodded, not fully understanding, but she could feel the weight behind his words. He handed her the lunch bag and kissed her forehead. "Be good. I always am," she said with a grin. As soon as she left, Marcus stood by the window again, watching her cross the street. When she disappeared from sight, he whispered to himself, "Stay safe, little one." Then he went to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old envelope marked with a single faded name. Rico. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew the contents by heart, a list of debts never repaid and sins that time hadn't erased. He slid it back into the drawer and closed it carefully. If Rico wanted him to come back into that world, he'd have to drag Marcus through fire to make it happen. At Oak Ridge, Amara's day began like any other. But she noticed something different about herself lately. something stronger. When she walked through the halls, her steps felt firmer. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who wasn't afraid anymore. It wasn't about fear leaving her life. It was about courage finally taking its place. During lunch, she sat with a group of classmates who had once ignored her. They talked about assignments and weekend plans, and for once she laughed with them. Sophie sat a few tables away, quiet, thoughtful. She hadn't tried to talk to Amara since the apology. But now something seemed to be pulling her closer. After lunch, Sophie walked over hesitantly. "Hey," she said softly. "Can I sit?" Amara blinked in surprise. Sure." Sophie sat down, fidgeting with her sleeves. "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For not hating me. For letting it go." Amara looked at her, calm and kind. "It wasn't easy. But my dad always says forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you." "It keeps your heart clean." Sophie nodded slowly. "Your dad sounds intense." Amara smiled faintly. "He's just different. But he's the best person I know." That evening, when Marcus arrived to pick her up, Sophie and her father were leaving the building at the same time. Charles froze when he saw Marcus, his face turning pale. Marcus gave him a polite nod. "Evening," Charles nodded stiffly. "Mr. Cole." Sophie's eyes widened as she realized who he was. "You're Amara's dad." Marcus smiled gently. "That's right." Sophie looked down, her voice small. "I'm sorry for what I did to her." Marcus's eyes softened. "You already told her that." "That's what matters." Charles exhaled slowly, then offered his hand. "For what it's worth, I respect what you did. Not many men protect their families with that kind of calm." Marcus shook his hand. "Peace is expensive. Most people just don't know how much it costs." As they drove away, Amara asked, "You knew her dad?" Marcus nodded. "A long time ago. We were different men back then." "Was he scared of you?" Marcus smiled faintly. "People don't get scared of me, Amara. They remember me." She frowned. "That sounds worse." "Sometimes it is," he admitted. "But I'd rather be remembered for standing up than for staying silent." That night the storm returned. It began with a quiet knock on the door around midnight. Marcus didn't move right away. He knew that kind of knock, not the nervous tap of a neighbor or the firm hand of a friend. It was slow, deliberate, almost respectful. He stood up, told Amara to stay in her room, and opened the door. 3 men stood outside. The one in the middle was tall, dressed in black, his expression calm but deadly serious. "Rico sends his regards," he said. Marcus looked at them, unshaken. "Tell Rico if he wants to talk, he knows where to find me. He doesn't need messengers." The man smiled faintly. "You know he doesn't like being told no." Marcus's voice stayed steady. "Then he shouldn't ask for things he can't have." The man's eyes hardened. "You've gone soft, Ghost." Marcus leaned closer, his tone quiet but cutting. "Soft isn't the word. Controlled is." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Marcus closed the door slowly, locking it. He knew this wasn't over. But Amara didn't need to see that side of him. Not yet. He walked to her room, checked on her, and found her still asleep. Her hand rested over her heart, peaceful, untroubled. He smiled softly, whispering, "You'll never know how much I fight for that peace." The next morning, Marcus went to meet Rico. He didn't tell Amara. He just left a note on the kitchen counter. Went to settle something. Be home soon. The meeting took place at an old warehouse on the edge of town. Rico was waiting, his suit sharp, his hair slicked back, his grin wide. "Marcus Cole," he said, spreading his arms. "The legend himself." Marcus walked in quietly. "You could have just called." "I like old school," Rico said. "Besides, I wanted to see if the stories were true, that the ghost traded his empire for a lunchbox and a school drop-off line." Marcus didn't smile. "That's called being a father," Rico chuckled. "You always had a soft spot for family. That's why you left. But you see, Marcus, when men like us disappear, people start thinking they can forget the past." "I didn't disappear," Marcus said. "I retired." "Retired?" Rico leaned forward. "No one retires from this life. You of all people should know that. You made too many enemies, took too many things that weren't yours. I took what I needed to survive." Rico nodded slowly. "So now you survive by teaching your kid to forgive bullies?" "Cute." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Watch your mouth," Rico smirked. "Or what? You'll go back to being the ghost?" "I'd like to see that." Marcus's eyes met his, calm but burning. "You already are." The room fell silent. Rico's grin faded for the first time. For a moment he saw the man he used to fear. Not angry, not loud, but terrifyingly still. The kind of man who didn't need to shout to end things. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low. You come near my daughter again, you won't find the man who left. You'll find the man who ended everything in his way. Do we understand each other? Rico didn't answer immediately. Then with a half smile he said, You've changed. Marcus nodded. Yes, but not enough for you to survive crossing me. He turned and walked out, leaving Rico staring after him. That night, Marcus came home to find Amara waiting on the couch. Where were you? She asked softly. He smiled tiredly. Just clearing the air. You look sad, she said, her voice small. He sat beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Not sad. Just reminded of what? That sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that never get seen. The ones you fight just to stay the person you promised to be. Amara leaned against him. You're the strongest person I know. Marcus smiled faintly. Strength isn't about fighting, Amara. It's about choosing peace when you have every reason not to. She looked up at him, her voice gentle. Is that what you did? He nodded. That's what we both did. She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. Then we're the same. He laughed softly. Maybe you're even stronger. Outside, the city lights flickered like quiet stars, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt the heaviness lift. The world might still be dangerous, the past might still whisper, but sitting there with his daughter beside him, he knew he had already won the only fight that mattered, because real power wasn't about fear or control, it was about protecting love without letting the darkness change you. And as the night deepened and peace settled over their small home, Marcus Cole finally let himself believe what he had almost forgotten, that even the most dangerous man in town could raise a child strong enough to never need his shadow. The years slid by quietly, like pages in a book being turned by a gentle hand. Oak Ridge Academy changed. The walls that once echoed with cruel laughter now carried the sound of new beginnings. Amara Cole had grown taller, wiser, and calmer. The shy girl who once sat alone had become a young woman whose confidence glowed softly. Not loud or proud, but steady. She had learned that kindness could cut deeper than revenge, that silence could hold more power than shouting. She graduated near the top of her class. The day of the ceremony, the auditorium was packed. Banners hung high and proud parents filled the seats. Marcus sat near the back, wearing the same gray suit he'd worn for years, the fabric slightly faded but pressed clean. His eyes followed every move his daughter made on that stage. When her name was called, the applause that rose wasn't polite, it was genuine. Even the teachers who had once whispered now stood, clapping for the girl who had changed the heart of the school. When Amara stepped to the podium to give her speech as student representative, her hands shook for a moment. Then she looked up, caught her father's eyes, and smiled. I used to think strength was about fighting, she began, her voice warm but steady. But now I know it's about peace. It's about choosing not to become what hurt you. The crowd quieted. When I first came here, I was scared. I was different. But someone once told me that kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you unshakable. Today I stand here because I believed him. She paused, her gaze finding Marcus again. He's sitting right there, my father, who taught me that forgiveness is the truest form of strength. I hope one day I can live with half his grace. Marcus's throat tightened. The applause that followed was thunderous, but for him it came through like a blur of sound. His heart ached with pride. In that moment he realized that every scar from his past, every sleepless night, every battle fought in silence had led to this, to a daughter who didn't need his shadow to protect her anymore. She had become her own light. After the ceremony, as people congratulated Amara, Sophie approached. She was different now too, her eyes softer, her voice quieter. You did amazing, she said sincerely. You really changed this place. Amara smiled. So did you. We both grew up? Sophie nodded, glancing toward Marcus, who stood a little distance away, talking to a teacher. He really scared my dad back then, she said with a small laugh. But I think your dad's kind of a hero. Amara looked at her father and said gently, No, he's just a man who learned peace the hard way. That night, at home, the small apartment felt brighter than usual. Marcus cooked her favorite meal, spaghetti with too much sauce, and insisted on toasting with orange juice poured into 2 chipped glasses. To the graduate, he said, raising his glass. And to the man who survived parenthood, she added, grinning. They laughed until their stomachs hurt. Later they sat on the balcony watching the lights of the city flicker like stars that had fallen close to the earth. Amara leaned her head on his shoulder. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything, he said. When you look back, do you ever wish you'd done things differently? Before me? Marcus was quiet for a long time. The hum of traffic below filled the silence. Finally, he said, Every man carries a past, Amara. Some try to erase it. I tried to make mine mean something. The only thing I'd change is how long it took me to realize what mattered. She turned to him. And what mattered? He smiled faintly. You, and the kind of peace that doesn't depend on fear. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she ever had before. Then you found it, she said. Because I feel it every day. Marcus looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the woman she had become. He realized then that his greatest victory was not in what he'd protected her from, but in what she had become despite it all. She carried the lessons he'd fought for, kindness over anger, peace over power, and she wore them like armor made of light. Months later, Amara started college, studying psychology. She said she wanted to help children who felt the way she once did, lost, scared, unseen. Marcus helped her move into her dorm room, carrying boxes up the stairs with his quiet strength. When everything was in place, he handed her a small box. Inside was the old watch he used to keep hidden, the one marked with the scratched symbol of a life long gone. I want you to have this, he said. It reminds me that even broken things can still keep time. She smiled, eyes glistening. I'll take care of it. I know you will. Before he left, she hugged him tightly. I love you, Dad. He whispered. I love you more, my brave girl. Then he walked away, not realizing he left her standing there with tears of both pride and peace. Years passed again. Marcus grew older, his hair turning silver, his steps slower. But every Sunday, without fail, Amara called. Sometimes they talked for hours about work, life, and little things that didn't matter but somehow meant everything. She told him stories about the children she helped, the ones who were bullied, scared, forgotten. Every time I help one of them, she said once, I hear your voice, Dad. The world only wins when you let it change who you are. He chuckled softly on the other end of the line. Then the world's got no chance against you. One crisp autumn morning, Oak Ridge Academy invited Amara back as a guest speaker. The auditorium looked smaller now, but her heart beat just as fast as it did on graduation day. She walked onto the same stage where she once stood trembling and looked out at a sea of new faces, young, hopeful, and uncertain. She took a breath and began. I used to walk these halls afraid. I thought the world was cruel and that being quiet meant being weak. But I was wrong. Strength isn't about how loud you are. It's about how kind you stay in a world that teaches you to be cruel. It's about forgiveness even when no one asks for it. She paused, her eyes soft. There was someone who taught me that lesson, my father. He didn't come from an easy life, but he gave me one built on love instead of fear. And I think that's the bravest thing anyone can do. The students listened, quiet and wide-eyed. When she finished, the applause filled the hall like music that carried years of healing in its echo. After the event, as Amara stepped outside into the sunlight, a gentle breeze brushed her hair. She looked up at the sky and smiled. Somewhere she knew Marcus was smiling too. At home that evening, Marcus sat in his chair by the window, the same spot where he used to watch over her as a little girl. The city was calm, the streets below alive with laughter. He felt peace, not the kind earned by power, but the kind earned by love fulfilled. On the table beside him rested a photo of Amara speaking on stage, a clipping someone had sent him from the local paper. Underneath it was the caption, From Victim to Voice, Amara Cole teaches forgiveness over fear. Marcus closed his eyes and whispered, That's my girl. Outside, the city lights flickered, not as warnings now, but as quiet reminders of the journey he'd taken, from fear to faith, from shadow to light, and somewhere in that stillness, the dangerous man the world once feared finally found what he had always been searching for. Peace.